Welcome to Féile and Phobbal's virtual spring festival, Féile na Earraigh 2021. This event is part of Féile and Phobbal's community engagement program and is supported by the Executive Office, TBUC, Together Building United Communities Good Relations. So here we are as part of International Women's Day, and we are going to talk about women who changed our worlds. And on the panel today, we have Susan McKay, who is a Derry-born acclaimed author and journalist whose new book, Northern Protestants on Shifting Ground, is coming out soon. And we also have Reverend Karen, so sorry.
Okay.
I was concentrating on your surname there, Sethuraman, and she is the first female Baptist minister in Ireland, a pastor of Soul Space, a peace and reconciliation hub based in Belfast, and is the founder of Spectrum. So, and I am Rosemary Jenkinson, short story writer and playwright from Belfast. So here we go, and I think we'll kick it off with a question about who are the great women who influenced you in the beginning in your as you grew up, and I'll address that. That could be inside the home or outside it, and I'll address that to Susan.
Well, I think it was only in very recent years that I realized that my mum was quite repressed in her role as a mother. I think she'd had much more fun as a young woman going dancing, you know, and I'm not so sure that she was all that keen on having three squalling daughters around her. But so the person who probably sort of gave me a more positive idea of womanhood was my Granny Rogers, my mother's mother. And she had been a housemaid. She was from Tipperary, but she'd come up north and she'd been in service all her life. But she started out as a housemaid and worked her way up to being a housekeeper. And she was just a really kind, good-humoured, matriarchal woman who loved people. And she became an Avon lady, and she was more or less like a counsellor to the entire area that she lived in Dungannon. And I don't know if she sold very much, but she was much loved by everybody. And I remember when I was about 14, she allowed me to get this pair of outrageous sort of sky-high heeled shoes that were made of pink suede with laces. And I thought they were fantastic. And my mother, who was much more practical and would never, ever have allowed such a pair of shoes to be got, was really annoyed about it. And I remember my granny sort of saying, leave her alone, you know. And that was great. That was a big moment in my life when I was allowed to teach her about in those shoes. And then later on in her life, my granny decided that it was her turn to be the lady, you know, having served all these wealthy people. She decided it was her turn. So she used to sit about in her armchair by the fire watching soaps and ordering people to bring her things. So I'm kind of hoping I can pull that one off as well.
Great, that's brilliant. Yeah, great role models there, and certainly to sit in your older age and get served is a very nice idea, and not in an old folks home. It's a good aspiration, yeah. Karen, what about you?
Yeah, like Susan, I would have to mention that my mom was really key and influential in right through my life. I lost her 8 months ago, so it's I really I really miss her, and but I just felt in honor of her that I really wanted to kickstart today to talk about her, a little snippet of her life. She raised me on her own as a single mom. She got pregnant outside of marriage, so you can imagine how difficult that was in the 70s. She ended up marrying my father, though I think there was probably a lot of pressure to do that, to sort of do the right thing. And he left whenever I was a baby, which meant then that she was on her own. He didn't stay in touch or offer any support financially. And so my mom raised me on her own in East Belfast, this working class woman. And she just did everything that a mom should do. And I do have memories of her really struggling financially. I know there were times that she struggled to put food on the table, but she was determined to hold a job, and she was determined to raise her daughter. And I think the reason why I'd want to mention her, Rosemary, is because when we think of influential women, we so often forget about the unsung heroes and the unheard of and the unspoken of. And I think my mum and even Susan's mum represent those women. They're kind of the backbone to the work that we do today, but they're not recognized. There's no platform, there's no book deal, there's no applause. But they are the ones, I think, on International Women's Day that deserve sometimes the biggest round of applause, because they're the ones that's in the background influencing our everyday lives. And that influence from my mom went right on into, I think, having her grandbabies just made her day. I think because she was a little bit older. She was a young mom, obviously having me at 18, but she was able to invest so much more into the grandkids, because in a sense she had a lot more time and freedom, and so she was full of fun and vitality, and she just taught me grace and what it is to treat people right and well. And I know I wasn't the easiest person to bring up, but she did it. And I think that those unsung heroes, those people who are under the radar, really need to be recognized. And she is really my unsung hero. And listen, when it came to her death, as painful as that was, she actually taught me how to die well, and she taught me how to face death. So yeah, I miss her, but her spirit lives on, through all of us. So
yeah, that's a brilliant one, saying the unsung heroes, because we really have reaped the rewards of our parents, and probably coming through us, their success and that mother strength. I mean, I was going to talk about my mother as well, because I think everybody does, but she was an artist. Well, she was an art teacher for many years, and she always would have loved a career in art, but because she grew up in the 50s and she had to support her family, she had younger sisters, and she couldn't go to art school in London, and that had been, she was accepted and it was her dream, but she had to stay, and she took a teaching job in art instead. So I feel she was very thwarted through her life, I feel, and even with us, we were almost like a reason for her not doing art, and I think therefore it made me, her dreams came into me, and she actually told me not to have a family. So I think I went by what she said, because and concentrated fully on the art so that I could have the career. So that was really through her teaching, in a way, even though I think women can have it all. But I think I probably learned that from her, just to concentrate. And I also grew up with my aunt when I was young in the house. And that was great, because it was like a second mother's love. And she would take me to the shops for sweets. And unfortunately, yes, that is my failing today, liking to eat too many sweets. So definitely I can blame my aunt for that. But yeah. So yes, mothers are wonderful, and close to Mother's Day as well here. And actually, Karen, you said about bravery in the face of death. I think it's a common theme that mothers show daughters how to do that. Yeah, brilliant. So the next, growing up, were there anyone outside your home that you would have admired? Just as a side question, anyone in the world?
Well,
yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
Go ahead,
no, go ahead, Susan.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I grew up in the watching the civil rights movement around me and on television and things, and my mum wasn't interested at all. My father was interested in it, my mother wasn't. I mean, I remember her watching one of the few women in the civil rights movement who ever made it onto TV and things, and my mum was sitting in her armchair knitting, and she said, "It's a pity that girl hadn't put on a bit of powder." And I thought, God knows who that was, but it was probably some really brave young woman who had sort of gone on TV to speak passionately about civil rights, But obviously someone like Bernadette Devlin, as a young woman, became a huge influence on women of my generation, because she just didn't care how she was perceived. She had a passion for what she was doing, and she was bloody well going to do it, and she didn't care how she was seen. And I remember Mary Holland, the journalist, talking about how she had, you know, sort of been in a car with Bernadette, sort of bringing her somewhere where she was about to make some big appearance, and sort of like applying lipstick to her face in a lay-by before they got there, you know, because, you know, Bernadette just didn't care about that whole thing of being a conventional woman, you know. So I think she was probably the first woman like that that had an influence on me, and there's been many, many since. You know, just women who are rebels and are just doing their own thing regardless of the convention of how women are supposed to behave or be perceived, because we can't win on that one, and it's still the case that we can't win. You know, you're not supposed to be successful if you're too feminine, because it's not feminine to be successful. But if you're too sort of not feminine, then you're weird and scary and they don't want you either. So I think the only way is just to bypass being what you're supposed to be at all.
Yeah, and on that, can I just say, if any women are watching this and saying we haven't applied enough makeup, well, we just don't care. So, and too late anyway. So, Karen, what about you?
Yeah, again, it was someone close to me. It was a teacher, actually, from those kind of critical years of age 12 to 18. Her name is Audrey Curry. I haven't warned her that I'm mentioning her today. She was that kind of cool teacher at school, you know, there's always that one cool, popular teacher. But she had this amazing ability to take time and really invest. And certainly for me, I mean, I'm still in touch with her today. She works in Stranmillis College. She does her thing. She's still a phenomenal woman and leader. But there's one particular incident that I remember, and it was whenever I was coming up to kind of university age and doing GCSEs and A levels. And I remember my mom, and I don't begrudge her for this. It was just the way the circumstances were. She said to me, Karen, university is not an option for you because I can't afford it. And I think everything in me gave up in terms of exams, even though I love studying and really loved reading and all of that. I just got this sense of, well, what's the point? And I remember Audrey Curry, Miss Curry, coming to me and saying about university in the future, and I shared this with her, and I'll never forget her saying to me, you can always go back. You can always come back to education. And I remembered those words whenever I went back to Queen's in my 20s, because something in her saw in this crazy young teenager who really was a bit wayward at times, but she saw something in me that she believed in. And I remember when I applied then for Queen's in my 20s, late 20s, 30s, I just constantly remembered that she reminded me that it was possible.
Yeah, brilliant one. Yeah, exactly. Those words are never forgotten. And then, yeah, to actually fulfill those words and go back is a brilliant thing.
What about you, Rosemary? What would you say if you were asked that?
Do you know, I'm really shallow here. I was only thinking about pop stars or something, and I was thinking about
that's not shallow, they're very influential.
Well, they are actually. Indeed, they are. And I was thinking, like, as a teen, I suppose there was Madonna, but I didn't like her at all because I just thought it was just popular and I didn't relate at all. And I thought people like Blondie and Chrissy Hind were the really cool women who actually fronted bands. I think there's a big difference between the women who were icons on their own and actually the women who toured in and out, but like as one of a group, and I think it's just a better dynamic, and I just admired them more. It's about being cool in life. Nobody wants to be the diva. I think I'd much rather be one of the, we could say they were, remember that horrible term they used to have in the 90s, ladettes?
Oh yes.
Oh God, but they are equal to men in a way, but I hate that term. But yeah, anyway, let's go for the next one. And yeah, I just wanted to talk about, in your own unique field, Susan, yours is journalism. So what would that be for you? Who would that be?
Well, there are a lot of brilliant women journalists around the world, but certainly in Ireland, I was very lucky that in the generation above me, I had people like Nell McCafferty and Mary Holland, you know, who were both stellar journalists who, again, just did their own thing. You know, there weren't, I often think of, you know, all the professions that women go into, and I think it's the same for you, Karen, you know, in your field. You're not really readily accepted. You're still sort of slightly an interloper. And in journalism, I just have this kind of image of a sort of conveyor belt with all these bland men in suits sort of smoothly rising to the top without even having to think about it. And beside them, there's this kind of rackety staircase, and there's all these talented women sort of scrambling to get up it, you know. But when you look at someone like, you know, Nell or Mary Holland, both of them just went their own way. And Nell was incredibly sort of vividly hilarious about really, really serious subjects. And that way she managed to sort of break through and get to do things that she would not have been permitted to do if she'd asked. You know, like she would have promoted the notion of the golden balls badge that she said that men should get, you know, for taking some responsibility for reproductive matters, you know. And Mary Holland was a much more sort of serious person, but I mean, again, she just broke ground in the way that she covered Northern Ireland. She was working from the heart of the British establishment, but she just wrote about what she saw, and she talked to people who would not have been the people that she would have been recommended to talk to, and she represented their views as well as more respectable people as they were seen. So I was very lucky to have those people in front of me. There were quite a lot of journalists who were older than me, women who were almost hostile. And now that I'm one of the older women, I can see that they felt a bit threatened by a younger person coming along and entering into their field. So I do my best to be as kind and as helpful as I can to younger people, younger women in particular in my field, because I see that they're still, and it makes me furious, they're still facing a lot of the same obstacles that I faced and continue to face. But people sometimes say to me in relation to, say, Lyra McKay, who was half my age and a friend, and I love that about today, that I think that people are much more likely to be friends with people across the generations, you know, and I think that's really, really nice. But people said to me, oh, so were you a mentor to Lyra? And I would say she was just as much of a mentor to me, because she had a whole set of skills and experiences that I didn't have. So she gave me plenty of knowledge and information that I wouldn't have had without her. So that's the thing I really like about today. I think there's a lot of influencing between women of different generations. Don't know if either of you has felt that.
Oh, shall I go? Okay. Yeah. With that, I think in playwriting, I think, yeah, I had a lot, because there have been some directors who have commissioned me. So they've directly influenced my career. And that would be, I would say, people like Lynn Parker in Dublin, and I would say Rachel O'Riordan also commissioned me, and she's big in London now. And the Paula McFetridge here in Belfast is also, I've worked on many plays, and she's given me a lot of work. And yeah, so there are, and in fact, literary managers as well, like Hannah Slatna I've worked with. So they've all helped me with my career and have, I suppose, shaped some of the things I've written about as well. So yeah, that, I mean, it's so important that women, particularly in the field like the arts, because most of the men who own the big theaters, they have always been, as I've gone through my career, have been the artistic directors of theaters, and there's been more male directors. So I think it's been particularly important that female directors have supported female writers. So I mean, and that's been great for my career. And I suppose there was one other writer who really influenced me, and it was one who is called Bridget O'Connor. And I met her in Newcastle upon Tyne. She was doing a creative writing course. I was 29 at the time, and I hadn't had anything published. And I went to her, it was short stories. She was a great short story writer. She wrote 2 great books. And unfortunately, she died later of breast cancer. So I never actually saw her again, but she definitely influenced me because she was so brilliant. And I think, you know, that's it. People's brilliance inspires you. So Karen, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a mentor kind of describing the field that I'm in as a men's club. It is. I mean, if anywhere is lacking far behind in terms of gender, it is the world of religion. It is the world of church. So for me, in the early days, there was a lot of stuff going on in my life. It wasn't even just about faith. It was about what was happening to my faith on a personal level, where I was starting to question the beliefs and the theology that I'd been taught, because my mom sent me to church and Sunday school, and I did develop a faith in my teens. So in a sense, I went through a season of my faith being deconstructed, where I started to ask all the hard questions. And somebody who was very influential in that season is someone that I've never met. Unfortunately, she passed away, I think, in 2019. Her name is Rachel Held Evans. This woman was extremely influential in America. She wasn't ordained. She was a blogger and a writer and a speaker, but she had this amazing ability to draw kind of all the spiritual wanderers and refugees into a place and round the table that was inclusive. She spoke out for women. She spoke out for LGBT plus community. She had this amazing heart to challenge the church. And she ended up then being part of Obama's administrative faith team. And so for me, this little girl in Ireland, I drew very closely into her work and into her life, because I could so much relate. So in a sense, sometimes our mentors are people that we haven't met. It could be the books that we've read. So Rachel, certainly, and we miss her voice today. But one thing I loved actually that I want to share about her is that she got a lot of hate mail, and I can relate to that. But what she used to do was she used to make paper origami's out of it. She would make swans and cut it up and make fancy houses and boats, and it was her way of dealing with hate mail. And that taught me what, you know. And then what she would do is try to highlight positive words in it amidst all the nasty words. And you can look it up online, it's brilliant. And she used that as a way to kind of not allow the hate for her feminine voice, and for her place in society, and speaking out against the church. She used that to kind of protect her spirit, and I loved that. The other person I want to mention very briefly is a current mentor. As a female Baptist minister in Ireland, they don't exist simply because the Irish Baptists don't ordain women. And one of my current mentor is a lady called Shan Marie Williams, and you guys talked about this. It's about women who have led the way, who are in a sense 2 steps ahead of what we're doing. And I don't know, she has supported me. She has trained pastors. She's led the way for women. She's pastored churches, and she meets with me every few weeks and holds me accountable. She lets me swear and rant and moan and gurn and get annoyed, and she speaks some hard truths in my life. And so from a Baptist perspective, she is one of many women who have led the way, and also in terms of me, is willing to stand over me as the only female Baptist here in Ireland. And those women are priceless. They're just amazing.
Yeah, we forget that, Karen, that sort of trailblazer that you are, being the only one. So that's quite amazing. And yeah, I was going to say, of course, that we basically know the old saying that there are well-behaved women seldom make history. Actually, they never make history. But can we say that, are there any dangerous or really, I know you mentioned obviously Bernadette Devlin, who would be controversial, but are there any others that you would really admire in your life? Sure, we'll go back to Karen, just to break the triumvirate here.
Yeah, I'm going to mention one who, if I could have a coffee with one person, it would be Mary McAleese. She's not an ordained minister, but listen, if anybody calls out the church, It's her. I think she is kind of, for me, the Rachel Held Evans of America. I think she is that person here in Ireland, and she gets a lot of criticism. And I was listening to her recently on Radio 4, and she talks about, look, I'm a woman of a faith, but I'm also a woman with a thinking brain. And she has this courage to call out the church, to say the way that you treat women, the way that you treat the LGBT plus community does not add up with faith, and it does not add up to an inclusive gospel. And so for me, she, I admire her, maybe because I see so much of myself in her. And I often try to get into, you remember the time when she met the Pope? I think she was president at the time, and the Pope refused to shake her hand. And he said to her husband, Martin, would you not rather, the Pope said to Martin, would you not rather be the president of Ireland than your wife? Wow. And I've often thought, I know what it is. I'm not the president of Ireland, but I know what it is to be completely chilled by men, religious men. But what I love about her, she held her ground and she said, no, I'm the elected one and I am the president of Ireland. So, you know, wherever you stand in the political world, Mary McAleese, for me, in terms of church and faith, is someone that I hugely admire.
Great.
Yeah.
Susan?
Well, I love women who get revenge. I think revenge is great. I think turning the other cheek is very overrated. And I loved when Greta Thunberg, who I think is fantastic, and she's only still, I don't know what age she is. Does anybody know? She's still a teenager anyway. She's really young, but she's so brave and so brilliant. And you remember when she made that big, passionate, emotional, powerful speech to the world leaders at the UN, and bloody Trump turned around and said, oh, she seems like a very happy young girl, looking forward to a bright and wonderful future. So nice to see. And I loved the fact that when he was getting onto his plane there recently, having been banished from humankind and the White House, she was immediately out from the long grass saying, he looks like a very happy old man looking forward to a bright and wonderful future. So nice to see. I thought that was just so classy. And I love when women do that, just get their own back. It isn't something that we get a chance to do very often, but she did it with such style.
Yeah, I love that. It's a brilliant riposte. Yeah. And
she waited for years to give it.
Yes.
No.
Oh yes, yeah. Revenge is served sweet later or something. That should be a quote. But I was thinking of the people that rebels, literary rebels, and there's many. There are many I could have chosen. But my all-time favorite is I don't know if you know her, but she's a French writer, Colette. There was a recent film about her life, and she was locked in the room by her publisher husband and forced to write her books. Well, actually, she should thank him because they were great books, but I don't think she needed to be locked in her room. But the thing is that once she divorced him, she went completely wild, was on the stage naked doing her lesbian kiss and scandalizing the whole of Paris. And yeah, I just really admire people who will let it all out in public and accept that controversy and actually make a name for themselves without being fearless. And I think, yeah, that's really what I want. And she wrote a lot about courtesans who had been, you know, from a female perspective, that really had hardly been written about. So it was really opening up stories that had never been seen before. And I really, so that's why she's my favorite writer of all time, I think. Oh, and there's another one. If I can fit this one in, because it's a contemporary writer that I totally love. She's also French. I don't know what it is about the French. They're just so carefree, not like us who sort of, oh, very sorry for offending you, you know, but they're not like that. This one is Virginie Despentes, and she's writing right now, and she wrote about her rape in very open terms. And I think I really admire somebody who talks about that, but not, I mean, I'm not as just like as a victim. She wrote a brilliant novel, a revenge novel, exactly what you were saying about Susan, about a girl who is raped and goes off on a massive killing spree. And I mean, it's just wonderful because you can feel it yourself if it had happened to you, that you would want to do, have that liberation by, getting free of all that hurt and pain. So I just admire so much. And she also writes about homelessness and things, and just wonderful issues. And she recently wrote a letter to the French government about racism and things. She just like doesn't care. She's got the roll up. She's French. It's like, I don't care. But you know, that's the French. So I love that.
Well, I have to say, Rosemary, I wouldn't have put you down as the sort who was going around saying, "Oh, so sorry, would you mind?" And
I do.
I think I'm just quite a false impression of you, or else you're pretending.
Well. This. No, I think my mother was always trying to make me apologetic. You know, our mothers were always very much trying to probably make us quite meek and that way, but that's way girls should be. But
could I just say on writers, Rosemary, I love Edna O'Brien because she's 90 and she's still going strong, and she's refusing to be the old woman who just retires to her rocking chair. And she's not only still writing, but she's still writing really powerfully, and she's breaking new ground. She's writing about things that haven't been written about before. And I just love that about her. And she has always got along. I mean, she was a bit like Colette, as you talked about, you know, because she was married to a man who was jealous of her because he thought he was the writer, and it turned out she was. And but she sort of saw him off and just got on with her career and raised her boys, and is still being herself all those years later.
Completely. Yeah, Edna's a brilliant example. And just recently going off to Africa to research her novel, you know, like in her late 80s. I mean, it's just incredible, that energy that has fueled her and that desire to always prove herself in her writing. She's just, totally phenomenal. I agree. Good one. So if we just go back to what woman in history made a huge impact on you? We can go back a long time for this one, whenever. Okay, Karen?
Okay, so this was a hard one because there are so many women throughout history from all walks of life, that are just amazing. There's a bit of a backstory to this. Whenever I was in primary school, I was, and through into secondary school, you wouldn't believe it now, but I was very sporty. In P7, I used to beat all the girls when we were running. So my primary school teacher used to make me race against all the boys, and I beat them. I loved it. I was determined to do it, but I was the only girl in kind of the boys football team. I was that girl, you know. But I remember the teacher saying to me, "Karen, do you know what? You need to think of Catherine Switzer." And I was too young. I didn't understand who Catherine Switzer was. But as I got older, I don't know how, but the name must have come across my path again. And it was the first woman to ever run the Boston Marathon in 1967. And the reason why she came across my path was because her pictures were being shown at whatever I was at. And it shows you they're famous pictures of these guys running on to where she was running in this marathon to try and pull her away and to get her out of this race. And her coach was the one that said to her, "Listen, marathons are not for fragile women, but if you can run those miles, I'll put you in for this Boston Marathon." And so what happened was then she started to run the marathon, and the manager, I'm trying to remember his name, I think it was Jock Semple, that's the famous pictures that you see in line with him running out trying to grab her number and pull her out of the race and telling her to get out of the way. And her manager, and it was actually her boyfriend, saved the day to pull him off her, and she managed to finish the race, and she ended up in the Hall of Fame. But what's interesting about her story, and this is important, is that even though she was the first woman to run the Boston Marathon, they ended up banning women from marathons after that. And there's something about when we make the change, sometimes things can go into reverse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you would think because she done it that there would be change and everybody would be out backflipping in the streets, hallelujah. But no, there was an actual ban for women. And obviously then 5 years later that changed. She ended up winning I think it was the New York Marathon, and ended up in the Hall of Fame, as you do. So she's probably one of the people that stands out for me because it's linked to my childhood. Does anybody want to share anything else, or do you want me to share another one? Or
Oh,
go ahead, Susan.
Well, I was thinking of Rosa Parks because I think she's a fabulous woman, but she's also a woman who was completely misrepresented in history. Everybody knows of Rosa Parks as being this Black woman who was on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, and she refused to give up her seat to a white person, as she was legally obliged to do. Black people were supposed to sit at the back of the bus, but she's always been represented in history as being this quiet, meek person who just finally sort of thought, I'm not having this anymore, and made a stand for herself. And the person who's always associated with them on the bus boycott of that time then was Martin Luther King. But in fact, I just read this brilliant book, Rebecca Traister. It's called Good and Mad, The Revolutionary Power of Women's Anger. I don't know what the cover on it is because that was a review copy that I got. But she talks about the actual history of Rosa Parks, and it turns out that she was a lifelong activist. And at the age of 9, I think it was, a white boy had threatened her, and she just picked up a brick and menaced him. And then she said, oh, he went on his way quietly after that, you know. But also then she was an elected representative within the civil rights movement, and she was an anti-rape activist, and she was also active in campaigning against Black men being framed as rapists during the period of when that was a really, really dangerous thing that could end up in serious problems for Black men. So she was a really engaged person, but she was represented in history as being this sort of silent figure who just made this one gesture, and she wasn't like that at all. She was a woman who should have been much more prominent, and she later on became an admirer of the Black Power movement and of Malcolm X, you know. So she was a person who became more and more radical. So I think it's really important to look at the history of women, but also to look for feminist versions of it, because sometimes the way that women survive in history is not the way that they actually were at all.
Can I just add to that? Actually, Rosa Parks was on my list as well, Susan. I have her down here. But interestingly, I was interested in the girl that didn't get as much spotlight. Her name was Claudette Colvin. Claudette Colvin was a teenager who, before Rosa Parks became famous, was already refusing to give up her seat. But she was never put into the media because she was pregnant and unmarried.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated whenever I was doing some work about Rosa Parks and about race to discover Claudette Colvin. And actually Rosa Parks acknowledged that she was the one, before she became famous, that she was the one that actually refused to give up her seat, but said that if her story had been used in the public, she would have been ripped apart.
Yeah.
Simply because she was unmarried and was pregnant. So I just find that fascinating. But I think she's a hero as well, because of the 5 women went and fought for the ban, you know, on the buses and of segregation. And I just think that Claudette Colvin as well as Rosa Parks are heroes.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's about the forgotten woman in that way. There's always, and I mean, I wasn't going to do a political one. I was thinking about the Bronte sisters and how brilliant they were. And the thing is about that, they kind of believed, I think their brother was the artist, Bramwell, and they kind of believed that he was the great talent of the family, you know, as the artist and just as a boy. And the irony is his career completely fell by the wayside, went into alcoholism, and they were the ended up, even though they had to take the male names to get published, but they ended up which I think is a great story as well, that they managed to be the big champions rather than the brother. So
yeah, albeit that, as you say, they had to take on male names to be taken seriously at all, and there was such disapproval when it emerged that Charlotte Bronte was in fact a woman. You know, there was the people who had been champions of his writing, as they thought, were really disapproving when they discovered that a woman had written these things and thought it was really unsuitable.
Yeah. And I love the fact also that they have a connection to here with the father from Rathfriland. I just think, and actually it was a friend of my mother's actually had a friend who was descended from the Brontes, but she couldn't write at all, unfortunately. But it would have been a great name. Imagine if you were descended and this is my new novel. It would have helped. But yes. So right, we'll look at any other contemporary or a historical. If anybody has anyone from history or contemporary they'd like to deal with, let's go for it.
I guess I'd just quickly like to mention Inez McCormack, who lots of people listening will probably know. And Inez died a few years ago, sadly, of cancer, very young or relatively young. And Inez was like one of the people that Karen was talking about earlier. You know, she just had collected around her this sort of grouping of people that she believed in all kinds of fields, and she was, you know, really promoted them and made them believe in themselves. And I think I would have been probably one of them, you know, kind of people who weren't fitting in, but she felt that you had something that was worth cultivating. But she used to say, she was a human rights activist and she was a trade unionist. And she would have said, you know, stand up for yourself, because if you don't stand up for yourself, no one else will. And she just, you know, she came from a background where her family wouldn't have shared her views. They wouldn't have, she was a civil rights activist as well in the 60s, and her family wouldn't really have been that way inclined at all, but she just went her own way. So she was a great person who has influenced an awful lot of younger trade union women now, I think.
Yeah, great one, Karen.
Yeah, I think today, I mean, there's, again, like I said earlier, there are so many. I like some people who are a bit fun as well. I do plug in quite a bit to, I don't know if you've ever heard of Abby Wambach. She was the American footballer, the first female American footballer to play in a World Cup. She's got the most top scores in terms of scoring goals. And she campaigns quite a lot for equal pay for women, and also raises a lot of money for various organizations, you know, diabetes and all sorts of. She is a phenomenal sportswoman in America, but she ended up marrying a woman called Glennon Doyle, and I've read some of her books. She was a famous blogger, very hilarious. Covered all things to do with being a mom, in marriage, raising kids, personal stuff like addictions. And she wrote a book last year called Untamed that I finished last year. I think I read it last summer, and I loved it. And I love following the two of them. They hooked up together, married each other, and they post these really funny things on Instagram that just keep me sane, because they just their lives together, these two wives who live together in America, have their own careers, are quite famous, but together they are about championing gender equality, and they want to see equality for all. And I admire them for that. And they've set up an organization called, I'm trying to remember, Together Rising, or Rising Together. And the purpose of it is that they really want to help young women and children who are in crisis. And so there is a hilarious side to them that if you want to plug into. I think sometimes we just need some funny people in our lives to keep us sane and grounded, and they are hilarious, these two women. And but then there's that serious campaigning side, and there is a famous side, plus they have Irish roots, just saying.
Yeah, well, there you are. But it is totally funny woman, definitely. I've always loved funny woman right the way through. Victoria Wood and oh well, millions, French and Saunders have always influenced me right the way through, because there were very few of them, certainly in the 80s and 90s. So yeah, definitely all for more funny women. And you were just saying about the fragility of women, you know, men saying that women are fragile, Karen, you know, when you were saying about the sport, the Boston Marathon runner, and it was that thing. My mother actually painted did a painting of Queen Elizabeth I, and I loved that because her quote was, "I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." And it was like, I kind of understood that, you know, women, we have to admit we're not usually as physically as, well, we're not physiologically as strong, but we have so much more to make up through that, through spirit and mental strength and fortitude. And I think that's really, it made something for me to think about that as a child. Yeah. So yeah, if that's us, we can look at summing up. This is where I can't read my notes and I fail to sum up totally. But I think, yeah, I love the thing about swans that we were saying, we make swans out of, Karen's comment, swans out of hate mail. And I was thinking, you can't do that on Twitter, unfortunately.
No, you can't. You just print them out, Rosemary, and then do it. That's what I do.
Oh, do you? Oh, yeah. Right. No, I wouldn't want to waste the paper on the haters. but yeah.
No, think of the trees, save the trees.
Exactly. Yeah.
Use a glass of wine instead.
A glass of wine. Yes, totally. But yeah, I think yeah, we were talking about the bravery of women and the caringness of mothers and people who taught us how to die and live, and people also who were influential in gathering people around them, a group, and to actually see a spark of something in somebody and respond to it, I think is a really great thing about what women can do with other women and help their careers. Yeah, we've talked about that, helping each other, and people who want equality for all and great things for general, not just women, but for everyone. And yeah, I loved Susan's thing about the Golden Balls Award. That was a good, I like that. We'll do that for men who wear condoms. We will give them Golden Balls Awards. And yeah, anybody else, any comments about that, about anything they
Well, I think just since we're finishing up, I would just love to say, I think that the women who run the women's sector organizations now are absolutely fantastic in Northern Ireland. You know, they're so brave and energetic and imaginative, and most of them work on constant sort of short-term contracts, very low pay, but they work as if they were being paid like the head of the UN, you know, and they continue just plugging away at sort of, you know, the injustices like domestic violence and rape and so on that women still have to endure as if it's of no account to society. And I just think they're fantastic. And just something just to follow on from what Karen was saying about being amused, anybody who wants to read a really funny book at the moment should read Michelle Gallen's Big Girls Small Town, which is set in a small border town in Northern Ireland and is really coarse and roisterous and funny and brilliant, and it's about a woman who just does things on her own terms and doesn't really fit in, but ultimately it's a bit hopeful, which I think we all need.
We do right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I would want to just add to what Susan said. I think in closing, I would want to, goodness, we have so many amazing women in Ireland and here in Northern Ireland that are just working day in and day out, not just making the difference, but being the difference. And whatever arena that's in, whether that's politics, education, or even recently, I've been thinking a lot about women in media. I think they are heroes. And when I think of the likes of Trish Devlin and Alison Morris, who have received death threats for just doing their ordinary job, for Amanda Ferguson, Andre Murphy, Jude Hill. There's so many women in media who I've been really thinking and praying for them as well, because I think they do phenomenal work. And I would probably finish my bit by reading Andrea Gorman. Do you remember the girl? She's one to watch, who took part in Biden's,
at Biden's inauguration.
Yeah, and I think she read her poem To the Hill We Climb, and she said, there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, and if only we are brave enough to be it. And I think that is just for all of us here, even in Ireland, that may we be that light and set the path and pave the way.
Brilliant. Yeah, fantastic to end on an inspirational note. And thanks so much to the panel, Karen and Susan, you were brilliant. And just a final thank you to the Executive Office, T-Book, Together Building United Communities, and Good Relations for supporting this event. And thanks so much for everybody who tuned in to Women Who Changed Our Worlds. Thanks very much.
And thank you very much, Rosemary, as well.
Thank you, Rosemary. Yeah, thank you. You were amazing.
Okay, bye now.
Bye.
Bye.